Okay, so we now come to the last, the grand finale, the last session. And the idea behind this session was to broad base the discussion, not just to have lawyers who happen to be storytellers, but also to have people from the outside, not the litigators, not from law firm, but to have people who have had some experience with the legal system. As a legal educator, we're very privileged to have Professor Moolchand Sharma, who has taught 1/3 of the present Supreme Court. All of them are his students, and they remember him very fondly. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, both Mr. Luthra and me were at a conference on the future of legal education, organized by the Harvard Law School and LSAC, and we had Justice Rohington Nariman deliver the keynote there. And he says, I remember my time as a Harvard alumnus, but more importantly, I remember my time in Delhi University law faculty learning the law, because we learned the law and we remember the law because it was brought to us in so alive a fashion by a wonderful young professor who had just started out his career then, called Professor Moolchand Sharma. And he still remembered Kalil versus Carbolic Smokeball, which is a foundational contract case. And he said, I remember all the facts, and that case came alive before my eyes, thanks to a wonderful law professor. Very glad to have you here, sir. And as soon as he made that remark, as luck would have it, Mr. Luthra dragged me to a meeting the next day where I happened to meet Professor Sharma and told him that Justice Nariman said this, so we must have you at this conference. And he immediately agreed. And he came here because I said one of the key tasks that we have before us is that we want our students to be exceptionally solid on the fundamentals and on the basic case law. We said for each basic subject, there may be about 5 or 6 foundational legal subjects, and we can teach those foundational legal subjects through just a couple of good, solid, old cases, but in a case plus methodology. For those of you who were in the morning, I did a little explanation of what we're doing in terms of our pedagogical revolution, a pedagogical restructuring, and one part of that is really taking the learning of law from Langdell's case method to a case plus method, where we start with the case, but we go way beyond the case into different domains, training the next set of lawyers to be policy advocates, to be interdisciplinary, to be creative, and generally to work for the better good of society. Next to him, we have Carl, who we are very privileged, has been with us both days. Thank you, Carl, for spending so much of time with us. Carl is one of the pioneers on the access to law movement, and has been a very effective user of the court system. He believes fundamentally in the principle that knowledge, particularly certain kinds of knowledge, should be free. For access should not be hidden behind copyright walls. One of that is the law itself and codes. So he got sued by the state of Georgia for putting up the Georgia state codes online. I mean, he's very good at collecting information, digitizing it, putting it into neatly accessible formats. And right now, and we got in touch because he started working with India as well, and he's very keen on unleashing a knowledge revolution in India by putting up as much of journal articles, scientific, legal, otherwise, in repositories that can be easily accessed by institutions and by students. And we're trying to navigate the borders of copyright law. For that, we had a very important copyright case before the Delhi High Court, and I'm very happy that Nandini, who was one of the key players in that litigation, where we battled against the publishers to ensure that there is a safe space for educational copying or educational reproduction of important material to further the educational process. So strictly within the educational paradigm, we thought that access to knowledge is important and copyright should not put undue fetters. And luckily the court agreed with us. Is Sai here? One of our lawyers is here as well, the one who helped us with our case. But hopefully in future we will coordinate with Carl as well to take this mission in important ways forward. We have Simi Srivastava, who again I've had the privilege of meeting just today, but we've been speaking on the phone. She is a storyteller, and I saw her son, Nupur actually, who's one of our key partners for IDIA, works with the Center for Social Justice in Ahmedabad, does wonderful work. Nupur told me as soon as she saw the outline of this conference that we must have Simi here. And so I went online, checked her up, saw her videos, and the way she teaches children and the others on the art of storytelling and how she brings it alive to them. And I said, we must have this person so that we cultivate the next set of lawyers who can bring in storytelling dimensions into their cases. But more importantly, Simi said she's very interested in creating a new bunch of ethical lawyers because she's had a nasty experience. In fact, she was very reluctant initially because she said, I have a nasty experience with the legal system. And I said, well, this is your chance because we are creating the new breed of lawyers to make sure that people don't have nasty experience with the system, that we give you a fine set of ethical lawyers who will drive the system.
I hope I'll get one from here.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. We have, again, I'm very, very honored to have invited Maja Daruwala, who's done phenomenal work on public interest lawyering. In fact, one of the leading public interest lawyers and policymakers that we have, policy thinkers that we have, thought leaders that we have today in our midst. When I was in law school in my second year, internships weren't very common, and I stayed back in law school during the vacation, and I had this economics professor. She said, what are you doing? I said, nothing much. I'm just staying back here because I think I may have flunked a subject or two. I may have to take the re-exam. So waiting around for that. And she said, well, why don't you work with this fabulous organization? And at that point, all of us were keen on just hardcore law. Corporate law was coming up, and that was my future as well as I saw it, corporate law. And she said, there's this beautiful organization. I said, what's the name? She said, Hengasara Hakkina Sangha, which in Kannada means an organization for women's rights. And I said, what the hell is that? And she said, well, they work on women's rights. I said, not interested. She said, no, just try them out. Just go there. You know, it was a far cry from corporate law and a career. So there's no way I'm going to get involved with it. But it changed my life. I mean, the reason I got drawn to social justice lawyering, I think the seeds were sown. Maja then was one of the key people behind Hengasara Hakkina Sangha, and I went in there, and she immediately put me on a project to go and track cases in Bellary, which is a district in Karnataka, and see how women litigants are faring there in the courts, and to do some data analysis. My first brush with really doing data gathering, because in law school we were doing projects, but mainly 5 textbooks, pretty much what you guys do now. One extract from here, one extract from here, one extract from here. No real thinking. Submit the project in a machine mode and be done with it, get our grades. This was the first real project I was interested in, because I actually started seeing how the law was impacting people on the ground, whether women that were being denied rights were able to move the courts, access the courts, get their claims filed, and it really changed my thinking then. And I said, my God, I really need to start engaging with the law in more real ways, because it really impacts society in a deep, fundamental way. And I think as lawyers we have a role there. So thank you, Maja, for the guidance at that point. And it's after many, many years that I'm back in touch, and we're very privileged that she's here with us. And lastly, Nandini Sundar needs no introduction, has been a phenomenal inspiration for many of us, has done a lot of work around marginalized communities, particularly tribal groups and others, worked on the environment. She is a sociology professor but has a background in anthropology, so comes with a very rich, diverse perspective. And I thought it's very important that lawyers and law students get access to that perspective. She's again been a key participant in the legal system, has brought cases before the courts. The most important one was a salva judum one, where she filed a case in the court saying that this is a private army that's being raised. It's unconstitutional, it's against the law, and the court agreed with her. And of course now she's continuing to follow up on that case. As many of you know, she's also been subjected to false charges, and she's fighting that as well, simply because she represents the underrepresented. So I thought as a champion of the cause of diversity, pluralism, and the underrepresented, we can have no better person than her to come and express her views on storytelling and justice and her own experience with the system. So with that, may I invite, what we'll do is we'll have a slight change in order. So Carl has, Carl's mandate from me was to sort of lay out the broad frame of how we think about storytelling from an overall justice perspective. And then we can have Professor Sharma come in, Moolchand Sharma, on legal education and storytelling and justice. And then we can move on to to Maya, and then to Professor Nandini Sundar, and then to Simi Srivastava, and then open it up for questions. Okay, so without much ado, Carl, please, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm not going to presume to sit here and tell you stories with Srivastava ji next to me, and I'm not going to explain the law with Dr. Sharma next to me. I'm going to try to tell you a little bit about how I've learned to tell my stories for the work I do. So I am not a lawyer. I dropped out of law school after 1 year. I would not recommend that course of action to you. This was 1982. Computers seemed to be the next big thing, and I ended up doing computers for pretty much the rest of my life. I've been called an activist, and it's actually not a word I like. I like Gandhiji's characterization of public workers, people trying to make their society better. And the technical term for what I do, at least in government, is public printer. And I'm not in government, but I act like I'm in government. I try to do what government is supposed to do. I've put about 50 crore pages of government content on the internet in the last 30 years, a lot of big government databases. Now, you know, activists, again, the term I don't like, are about changing some aspect of society, right? You could be tackling disease and famine, human trafficking, human rights, economic inequality. The thing that I care about passionately is universal access to human knowledge. Now, you might say to yourself that, you know, that sounds like a airy kind of goal, and that there's real problems in the world that we need to solve, right? There's a food surplus in India and 200 million people starving. There's global warming, and Delhi has some of the worst pollution in the world. 1 of 8 deaths in India are from air pollution, I read just recently. There's growing economic inequality. And so why care about access to knowledge? And I believe the reason for that is that in a democracy, we own our government, and informed citizenry is key to democracy. So in our case in the United States, if Donald Trump does not believe in global warming, if he is dismantling all our environmental efforts, there's only one way to solve that, and that's to educate ourselves and put a new government in, or force the government to do things differently. So I think access to knowledge is a necessary way to solve some of the bigger problems. It's a precondition to attacking some of these other very, very serious problems that are out there. Now, why is story so important? It's because if you're going to change something important, you've got to be able to explain to people why, right? If your government is not paying attention to global warming, you have to tell them why your solution, your thing, is important. Now, I'm a computer person, and there's a lot of young people out there that think that hacking is kind of the way to solve problems. And it's like throwing stones at a window, right? You do it anonymously, but you have no story. And you're basically, when you're hacking on the internet, you're committing violence. And violence is not how you change the world. You have to tell a story. And you know, the best storyteller in history, I think, was Gandhiji. He didn't just walk to the sea and make salt, right? And say, hey, everybody make salt. He told stories, and he told stories to himself and his colleagues at the ashram. And they sat down and they educated themselves about the issues. And then he told stories to the viceroy. Before he went to make salt, he wrote him a letter and said, dear friend. And he explained what he was going to do. So he petitioned his government and he informed them about what he was doing. Justice Ranade said the reason that we petition is to educate ourselves and to warn our rulers. And I think that's an important example of storytelling. And I think Satyagraha is all about developing and then presenting and acting upon a story. So the issues I work on are often large government databases. Those are niche issues. I worked for John Podesta for a couple years. I was his chief technology officer at the Center for American Progress in between running nonprofits. And so I knew a lot of people in the Obama White House. A lot of folks I had worked with were there. And I would go to them and they'd feed me lunch in the White House mess, and you know, that was all very nice. And I'd say, so what are you working on, Carl? Say, well, I'm trying to get 9 million nonprofit tax returns, nonprofit, PDF files up on the internet. Can you help me? And they just look at me and say, Carl, we have 2 wars going on. We've got a financial meltdown. The Republicans hate us. We love you, but we're not going to do your issue right now. It's not going to be on the stack. So you have to be able to explain your issues, and your stories have to be deep. When you get those 5 minutes with the government minister, you need to be able to very quickly explain why those 9 million files need to be online. And it can't just be a quick elevator pitch. You've got to give that, but these ministers and members of Congress are pretty smart. And they're usually going to ask you one really hard question, like, who's going to hate your idea? And you have to have an honest answer. You're going to say, well, these people aren't going to like it, and here's why. And so you need to be able to tell your story in 5 minutes. But if you end up in the courts, you need to be able to tell your story in a very long, detailed way. And when you go to the press, you need to be able to explain to that reporter why this is important. Like, who cares about 9 million IRS files? Well, it turns out that the transparency and accountability of nonprofits is based on their annual reports. But you have to be able to explain that in a way that a newspaper man is going to think that it's important. And most importantly, you got to be able to tell yourself a story as to why you are doing this. Why would you want to spend 10 years of your life working on some niche issue? You have to educate yourself as to why this is important. I think what's important, though, is that when you tell a story, it can't just be talk, right? You can't just be in a think tank with some policy paper. If you're going to be effective, your story's got to be real. It's got to be about some actual need that people care. You've got to have 1 million people using, the stuff that you're doing, because then all of a sudden you have credibility. If you just go to government and say, I think the IRS files should be online, they're like, yeah, right, we have a lot to do. But if you say, I put them online, and I'm getting 5 million users every month, then you have a different level of credibility. It's a different kind of story. It sounds real. You have to be explained why what you're doing is right, why the existing narrative is wrong, right? Why this fixed system that's out there, that the files are not available. Well, why should they be available? And more importantly, what's right about the current system? Because it's not like the entire system is broken. If you just go in and say, you guys are stupid, you're doing everything wrong, you're never really going to convince somebody to do things your way. You've got to honestly say, well, you're doing some things right and you're doing some things wrong. So that's my philosophy of storytelling. I'm going to tell you 2 examples of stories that I've had to tell. And one is based in India. Actually, they're both based in India. So the first is about public safety codes. Now, my background was on the internet standards. I've written internet requests for comments. I developed the first radio station on the internet. I didn't develop any of the fundamental internet protocols, but I was privileged to work with and know many of the people that invented email and file transfer protocol. I saw Tim Berners-Lee when he was just thinking about creating the World Wide Web. And so to me, things like building codes and electrical codes and fire codes are important, right? These are technical laws, but in our modern technical society, these laws are very important. Building codes are about proper egress in the case of a fire, right? So if you run a hospital, you want to know whether you're going to be able to get your people out of the door. And those codes tell you some of the fundamental requirements for that safety. Hazardous material transport on roads, right? We have tanker trucks and railroads that explode, and there are rules about how you transport these things based on our past experience of it's going wrong. There are technical standards for personal protective equipment. If you're a firefighter and you want to be safe in a firefighter, there are rules about the goggles you wear and the equipment. And as a firefighter, you ought to be able to read those rules and ask yourself whether your equipment is safe. There are occupational safety rules for the safety of machines, and if you work in a factory, you ought to be able to know whether your machine is safe. And more importantly, if you're looking at a machine and you think it might not be safe, you ought to be able to read those laws about what safe machines are. Toys and infants, there's standards for toy safety, there's standards for infant products. So these are important rules. They are the law, but all over the world, these technical standards are sold. In India, the National Building Code costs 14,000 rupees. copyright is asserted over there. So even if you paid the 14,000 rupees, you're not supposed to copy it off. If you bought the fire safety code and you want to make copies for all your fellow firefighters, you're not allowed to do that. And the fiction is that these are voluntary standards, that they're not the law. Now, I don't believe that, and I set out about 10 years ago to change that. So in the United States, standards are privately developed by standards development organizations. These are private, nonprofit organizations. They develop model codes. They want them to be the law. Those codes are then incorporated by reference into the law. So the Code of Federal Regulations says you must have safe buildings. We hereby incorporate by reference the International Building Code version from the year 2009. And everybody in the United States agrees that they are the law, but this fiction has arisen that they are, for some reason, able to be copyrighted, and they are private parties that own these, and that for some reason you have to go ask this private party before you're able to speak the law, and they enforce these copyrights. We've seen students go to the National Fire Protection Association and say, I want to excerpt 2 or 3 paragraphs from the National Electrical Code, and permission has been denied. We've had students want to write computer algorithms that incorporate the energy code in, so you can look at a building design and decide whether or not it's energy efficient. And permission was denied to speak the law, as it were, to a computer program. In India, the Bureau of Indian Standards is not a private nonprofit body, it's a government body, but it acts like all these standards development organizations all over the world. So again, their feeling is that these are voluntary standards, and I've gone over this at length with the standards development organizations. They maintain that you don't need to read these standards, right? The only people who need to read the standards are manufacturers and a couple government officials, and then the government will stamp your thing as being safe, and you can just count on that. And not only that, you're not smart enough to read these technical things, right? In fact, in our litigation over my posting of the National Electrical Code, the plaintiffs maintained that I was unqualified to be able to read these codes. Now, I've been working with standards for many, many years. I'm not an electrician, but I certainly was able to read that. And then they have a third argument, which is they need the money to develop high-quality codes. And if we make available these laws for free, they won't get the money, they won't develop high-quality codes, and babies will die. I was actually accused of that in a hearing that the Office of Management and Budget, part of the White House, was holding on revamping some of these things. Babies will die because of my actions. So I think people want these codes. I went ahead and bought a whole bunch of them. In the United States, I bought about 1,000 codes that are incorporated by reference. I posted them on the internet. In India, I bought all 19,000 Indian standards. I've posted them on the internet. We make them better, right? We don't just take the printed document and scan it and post it. When we can only get the printed document, we often retype them into HTML. We redraw the diagrams as high-quality vector graphics so you can make it big on a poster and small and paste it into your Word document. We make them accessible to the visually impaired, which the standards are not. When you buy them from the standards development organizations or for BIS. And most importantly, we make them free. We make them work on your cell phone, right? We speak the law in a better fashion. I have 2 minutes left. Oh, okay. Well, we'll do this very quickly. So look, I don't think they need all the money. Many of these standards bodies in the US pay $1 million, $2 million salaries. I think people actually want to use the standards. When I've posted the Indian standards online, we've had millions and millions of views because every engineering student in India has to read the building code. And before, they were unable to read them. And so we've had a huge number of users. We've had a whole bunch of people come in with very compelling stories about how they've been able to use the codes in more effective ways. And so that's my story. And that's different than the narrative that exists. We have told that story. When I first wanted to post the Indian standards, I went to see Sam Petroda, who was a member of Manmohan Singh's cabinet at the time. I told him why I wanted to post the standards, and he said, this is good. I posted the standards. The Bureau didn't like me, so we petitioned the ministry and told that story again. We are now telling that story in public interest litigation with 2 of my Indian co-petitioners to the High Court of Delhi. So again, the point is you're going to hear a story about why things are the way they are, and if you want to change that, you need to tell a different story. I'm out of time.
Thank you.
I have so much to speak because every word which has been spoken here since morning has come out with great passion, with great jurisprudence of stories, and every word can be reflected upon, can be talked upon, can be explained upon. And therefore, I really don't know how do I convert all that into a brief capsule. And I have nothing to speak because I think so much wisdom has flown, I can hardly add to that. But despite of that, I'll take these 10 minutes and I will try to say whatever comes to my mind. Trust and believe I have not prepared at all. I did prepare something, but that started with the Honorable Justice Dhananjay Chandrachud's exposition of Explorer's case, because I used to devote 20 to 30 hours with people like Honorable Justice Rohington Nariman, people like Justice Chandrachud, Justice Sanjay Kishan Kaul, and all others. And therefore, he has already said a major part of that. Maybe 1 or 2 more words I will reflect. But I will pick up from the question which Maja Daruwala raised to the previous panel. And she said that all right, judge passes this great order, and then what? Then what? She was completely in the dark because she was only trying to find out what happened to that old man and why the story went the way it went before her. It is her sensitivity, it is her reflectivity, it is her passion which came out with some kind of creative order. But where that creativity has ultimately led to, that still remains a question mark. And according to her, the beginning has to be made from the legal profession because they are the officer on whom hinges the whole delivery justice system, be it prosecutor or be it a defender. And therefore ethics there are very, very important. And let me tell you, I have a story in my own life how I learned that and then how my whole life got changed. I'll just take 3-4 minutes in explaining that. I was a school-going child. In 5th standard, I used to participate in Hindi debates. And I was considered to be a very good debater. My all friends and my all mohalla walas, my community people, all the time thought he is a great argumentator. I'm shifting my words. He is a great argumentator. He can build any case. Okay, there was a small cricket team, and we were having a tough match against our adversary. And somebody had to appoint umpire from each side. The other side appointed somebody as umpire, and he will not give any wicket under LBW, leg before wicket, right? My turn came. My all team people said that, look, Sharma, you are a great argumentator, you are a great debater, and please, you should ensure that none of our player gets out because of LBW, because other side was not fair, was not non-arbitrary, were discriminatory, were having bias, were having prejudice. Okay, these terms I did not know at that time. Okay, but these terms now I can recollect. So I was asked. Now I stood there. I should be very honest. First LBW, I said no. Second, I said no. But while I was saying no, I was feeling too guilty, too small, too cheap about myself. Am I a judge? Mind, at that time, great judge notion was not in my mind. What was in my mind was Panch Parameshwar. Have you read the story of Munshi Premchand, Panch Parameshwar? That you are a judge. Everybody has trusted you. You are the God of trust. You are the God of justice. And I got very, very unnerved. I called the captain of my team and I said, look, I want to retire. I don't want. He said, no, you are the best, you stand. I said, do you believe I'm the best? He said, yes. Next LBW, and I said, please mark, I learned a great lesson from there, that lawyering makes you only adversarial. Lawyering makes you compromise ethics. And therefore, what is the first need? First need for Bar Council of India, legal profession, law schools, national law schools, every law school is to give sound learning. And I'm not saying teaching, I'm not saying tutoring, I'm saying learning. And learning cannot be done without you share stories that how a lawyer, when takes an unethical stand, what kind of consequences can emerge there. But my story doesn't stop there. Then I thought that job is greater because there you can maintain your dignity. So what happened was that I thought in my life I should try to become a judge. Okay, I joined my LLB. Okay, and after I joined my LLB, toward the end of 3 years, I got more frustrated. And why I got frustrated? Many times anxieties will come, questions will come. Why this law has been articulated like this? Why this law has been interpreted like this? Why in Nanavati what court said is like this? Or why in this particular case this thing has happened? Now many questions will come to the mind. You raise the questions in the class and either your queries get more compounded or they remain unattended. That, made me think that becoming a teacher in a different word, I don't call teacher now, but yes, being a moderator in a classroom is more important if you really want law to have a speaking relationship with justice. Unfortunately, what is happening is relationship between law and justice sometimes gets frozen. And you require that skill, you require that passion, right, to break that frozen relationship. Fine, I came as a teacher, and then very surprising is what I find. I go to take my first class, and I see Mr. Arun Jaitley sitting in my class. Though Mr. Jaitley was my classmate. But what happened during emergency, he was put behind the bar. 5 different kind of jobs, and after attending the school also. He will come back home, will give 2 rupees of his earning to his mother to ensure that tomorrow there is a flour, there is chapatis are made, and if there is nothing else, at least onion is there to eat with the chapati. And with a what great satisfaction the person will sleep. And he had great dream. Sitaron se aage aisa jahan hai. I mean, he thought he can conquer the world, right? Now what happens is, this boy somehow comes to grip the realities. Now think, 5 jobs. What kind of job? He will go and polish the shoes at a tourist spot in Okhla on every Sunday. And while he is polishing the shoe, please mark 9.5-year child, polishing the shoe, some person will be there who is little bit more considerate and might give you a tip of another extra paisa, or there could be other who could kick you with that very shoe, saying you, is this the training you have taken? And mind, you are not trained in that art. You are doing it because you have to meet two ends, and because nation is facing a crisis at Chinese border, and you want to contribute to National Defense Fund. Now please mark, that boy comes from there and then in the evening goes and gives tuitions to his own classmate, and the tuition fee he gets is what? 1 rupee a week and 1 kg of vegetable which is grown in the garden of those guys. Now that chap suddenly has to come and stand before Justice Rohinton Nariman and Justice Chandrachud. That is a long journey which this man has taken. And why this journey? You know what Javed Akhtar Sahab was telling? The end of the story, right? But to me, end of the story is nothing. I have strong agreement with him, strong disagreement with him. It is not the end of the story. You are the maker of the end of the story. It is your sensitivity, it is your reflection, it is your courage, it is your craftsmanship, it is your dream. If you don't dream, you can never create a beautiful story, and story can never end beautifully. And remember, no story ever come to an end. If a story has come to an end, meaning thereby life has become completely stale, completely dead. That story has to continue, has to continue, has to continue. And mind, what happened? In the class, you trust and believe. I owe so much to these people. My entire speaking today, I told you, 10th standard, I read what is English alphabet. I did not know how to write A, B, C, D, E. And I suddenly come before a class where all these people with convent school background, with judge's family background, with such Praminanand, these are the people who were in my class. Now what happened? What happened? Every day I used to suffer from constipation. I could hardly sleep, but I rejoiced that. I enjoyed that. Why I enjoyed? Every morning I went with a challenge that, look, these are the people who will not only take my wicket LBW, they will directly bowl me. Are you getting my point? And therefore, I had to prepare so much. But it is your honesty, it is your sensibility, it is your integrity which will convince any student, every young man of your integrity. And once if he is convinced of integrity, what word you speak has a meaning. This is how these people created this Spangular Explorer case. 30 hours and all used to fight that no sir, it has to continue more. In December, when the temperature is 2 degree, 1 degree, 200 students on the floor at 8:30 in the morning. Not because they wanted to hear me, not at all, because they wanted to create a dialogue. You only become an instrument. I hardly knew much. What I only used to do is to raise their anxieties, to raise their curiosity. And while they were reflecting on their anxieties and curiosity, I had a great opportunity of learning. And I created an alternate hypothetical case in 1.5 minutes, and I shut up my mouth. And what was that hypothetical case? That case was, here is a woman, got married to somebody. Now, young couple, only construction worker. Now here's this man, gets friendly with other women, elopes with her, while his own wife, who was having 3 kids, and mind, this is not hypothetical purely. It is based on the judgment of a district court in Maharashtra, right? And now what happens is, he elopes, this woman is left with 3 children. She goes to the contractor and she says, can I be substituted in place of my husband? Where has your husband gone? Poor woman, please understand, Indian society, Indian culture, she does not dial well. She says he is sick. All right. After 5-6 days, he asks, what has happened to him? Ultimately, he comes to know that her husband has deserted her, has eloped with somebody. Now, right from that day, his attitude toward her changes. Even if she is late for 10 minutes, he will not reprimand her. And he will give priority to her. Please mark, you and I will understand it differently. Right? That nice, good, kind, generous. It is her sensitivity which could perceive that evils are falling on me. And ultimately what happens, one day he advances toward her, she refuses, next day onward, she stops getting the job. She goes to other contractor, he knows the whole story, he engages her. When she comes back home, she finds her child suffering from high fever. Now she has no money, no medicine. There are only 30 families living in shanties. No doctor. She only boils some water. And because she was told through stories that if you are having fever, give warm water. She keeps on giving warm water for 3 days, and every day she has to report because she will not get the wage. Ultimately he dies. Second son dies. Third, the similar symptom. And now she realizes that, look, life for me is gone because my husband has run away. My children are going away. What for am I surviving? What do I do? And then, her community people, they come, they say, look, your brother had a cousin who is the mukhiya, who is the sarpanch of an adjacent village. Because he has power, he has authority, he can help you out. She, in the midnight, leaving her small child, goes, walks 4 kilometer distance, reaches to him. He was taking his alcohol, and she goes, knocks, and he looks out toward her and he says, get out, why have you come? Then suddenly he realizes, no, you come. You happen to be wife of my brother, something nasty must have happened. Then she tells the whole story. He says, all right, what is the problem? You be with me, you give me warmth in my life, I'll give you everything. And now the thought process goes, what do I do? There is life of my child. He will die if I don't compromise. Should I compromise? The second thought comes, if I compromise and my child grows, later on what will it tell? What kind of mother are you? You sold your body because you wanted to have comforts in my name. Now she is in that thought process. She goes back, picks up the son, jumps in the well. The son dies. She somehow is rescued and prosecution is launched against her. Now, what about a spankular comes here? Okay? And mind, this cannot be argued. This cannot be argued and this cannot be decided unless the lawyer, the judge, the prosecutor, everybody believes in transformative social justice and law itself taking turn to reflect on the context. I end with what Wendell Holmes said. It is not only logic. Law is not logic. Law is experience of life. And each one of us is under an obligation that our experiences we have to bring in narratives, be they are narratives of law, be they are narrative of justice, but with integrity, honesty, and simplicity. Thank you.
Actually, quite amazed that you are all sitting over here still. Have they tied you to your seats? Yeah, it's been a long afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to these amazing people. And Professor Moolchand, you really humble me, because my story is so different. Actually, it's not even a story. In fact, you put me quite into a panic when you asked me to narrate something about myself, because I'm quite private. So I didn't want to take it to anything to do with me, but since it's a storytelling moment, I phoned up Nandini and said, Nandini, what am I supposed to do? And she was no help at all. No help at all. Useless woman. Anyway, so, but sometimes she made me think when I put down the phone that I'm left to myself. So some things get buried inside you, you know, for a long time, and you don't talk about them, and you think you've forgotten them. But some things that are buried inside you are brought out by an opportunity, by people, by a moment that spurs them on. So my story really is about waking up to that inchoate sense of justice, which I believe is buried in each of us, if only there were opportunities, people, moments to bring them to life. And it decides how you react to those moments. It decides what ethics, what values are going to govern your life, and what is going to govern your practice if you are indeed in law practice. In my case, not so much in court, but outside. So, to begin, I come from a very lucky family. Very little of the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune have ever touched us. As children, we were naturally sheltered. Being sheltered was quite the default position. There was nothing to fear in those big houses, not like your story. And the life was ordered. It was surrounded by decent, good folk. So my father was in one of those transferable jobs. So one day we had to take a ship to the UK. And we had to go via the Cape of Good Hope to England. It was the only port of call, and it was at the time of apartheid, at the height of apartheid, at the time when apartheid was at its height, but I knew nothing of it. I knew nothing of what it meant. I'd never even heard the word. We landed, and there was a bus tour, a day tour, where you go out quickly, you go and look at the sights, you go a little bit shopping, then you have your khana, and then you get into the bus, and you come back onto the ship, and that's the end of the day. It's very exciting and very interesting. My 17-year-old sister and I were absolutely besides ourselves with longing to go to this place. And my father said he would never go. We were also shocked. We said, why aren't you coming with us? And he said, I will never step into this place. And we didn't understand why, and he never explained why. But my mother agreed that she would take us. When we got into the bus at Cape Town, it was amazing. Cape Town is the most exquisite place. It is mountainous, it's undulating, it's clean, it's got the most blue waters, the deepest blue skies. It is amazing. At lunch break, at the tour, we stopped before a big, glittery department store. My sister had never seen an escalator, so she rushed in, and my mother rushed in behind her. And we were all in a large group, so I got a little bit left behind with the guide. Now, my sister and mother are very fair. They're about 6, 7 shades fairer than me. But suddenly I found a hand on my shoulder, and the lady guide said, you can't go in. And she said, go and sit outside on that bench. I didn't understand why, but I went and sat down on the bench. And while I sat there, I was sitting directly in front of the department store, and it had glass doors and shiny handles, and just there was a little sign at the handle saying, whites only. And I thought, whites only means what? Then I realized they're talking to me. I am the whites only not. I am me and there is no white. And suddenly I looked down and I felt my sundress. It had no sleeves. And I thought, why are my arms so brown? Why are they so long? Why can't I put my skirt over my shoes and over my knees? Then I won't have to, these people won't have to look at me sitting over here, this brown person. People were passing up and down and they never noticed me. But if one of them chanced to glance at me, I wanted to just shrink into myself. And it was the first time that I had faced discrimination. It was the first time that I felt shame for being dark. In fact, it was the first time I felt shame for being anything, because I came from the kind of family that didn't have to feel shame for anything. It was the first time I felt alienated from my sister and mother and felt completely alone. I couldn't understand why they could be inside and different and I had to be outside. Years later, that sense of ache, that sense of loneliness, of being excluded, stayed with me beyond anything I can explain to you. Today I'm telling you at my age this story, so you must imagine how deeply I felt it. Years later, my mother would remind me that I must have sat on that bench. She thought the whole thing was mythical. And years later, she reminded me that it couldn't have been more than 5 minutes that she allowed herself to be separated from me. But she could not realize the maelstrom of anger, of unfairness, of helplessness, and the metamorphosis of those 5 minutes. It allowed me to understand my own privilege, to empathize with all those who are excluded, marginalized, beaten down by others, and it taught me to fight for equality and for equity in the best way I knew how. I did not become a lawyer or learn lawyering for many years later. But when I did, the first book I opened was of jurisprudence. And it gave me all the words, somebody else gave me all the words that were lying inside my head and in my heart so that I could articulate them. And I promised that I would articulate them on behalf of others at that time. Perhaps if I had been 22, I could not have thought like that. But as it was, I was 32. So I could think like that because I had some other experiences outside of my own sheltered life. But now, despite what was said in the panel before, what the judges said, I want to say some things. In the structure of our courts, in the processes of our courts, in the debased way of our lawyering, there is no room for the real story to come out. There is no room to tell the story, to hear the story about how it feels to be beaten again and again, how it feels to be raped, how it feels to sit outside your haunches outside the district court in Alwar in chains, in shackles, and not have the judge look up to ask why you are in chains. There is no room for there is no room to argue and explain why you were in a certain place and why you were picked up by the police and why you were bailed out and that you have dehari and that you haven't gone home to your family and they won't know where you are, while the judge gives you remand mechanically and your lawyer argues about bail or messes you about bail. It is no use to tell me that there is a legal system. It is no use to tell me that there is free legal aid because there is no empathy. There is no time for empathy. If you see, you're talking, Justice Mittal quite rightly and quite justifiably talks about the changes that she has made in the children's courts. But that is not so anywhere else in the country. It is not there in Saharanpur, it is not there in Bilaspur, it is not there in Ranchi, it is not there in Chhattisgarh. There is nothing, nothing. But you get into jail very, very quickly. And then you can't get out of the coils of the law. There is no patience, there is no graciousness, there is no gravity for pain, for tragedy. Now, everybody said, everybody who has been with you has talked to you about exhortation. You must do good. You must read the Ramayana. You must follow the ethics. It won't work. If it was going to work, it would have worked all those years, even now, today. For decades and decades. This is not a sudden thing that has happened. You're not entering a profession which is at its pinnacle, but at its nadir. And you are going to have to decide whether it's going to remain that way. And you are going to battle the same things, because you can't change an ecosystem by exhortation. You can change it by example. You can change it by built-in incentives. You can build in by disincentives. If there is never going to be consequences for your lying on affidavit, why won't you lie on affidavit? I would. If the affidavit is made by somebody with a 30-year-old typewriter at 30,000 who says, "Madam, bolo ji, kuch bhi kar lenge," then that is the worth of your affidavit. But there is a consequence for lying on affidavit which never will come your way. So why won't you do it? So with all of these things, maybe I was a coward. I turned away from the courts because I thought individual by individual I can't do anything. But I did try and spend my life trying to change policy in the hope that one small change, tiny change, would actually benefit millions and millions. For instance, the right to information. That's a very good example. But have my interventions in policing, in prisons, changed the lives of thousands? And this is where you find me today. Successful? Disappointed? Well, that's another story. Thank you.
What we've been hearing the whole day is really about justice within the law, within the legal framework. And I have to say that as an anthropologist, one is skeptical about the existence of this framework as the only framework that deals with law. When I first went to Bastar, I lived in a village between 91 and 93. And one of the incidents that I remember most clearly was one where a man had committed suicide. He had hanged himself from a tree. And the villagers were scared that the police would come and harass them, would accuse them of murdering this man. So they untied the man and hung him on a tree in the neighboring village. So that village also got a bit scared, and they also untied him and they hung him on the tree of a third village. Now the third village says we can't continue like this. So they collected 500 rupees from each house and gave it to the police so that the police wouldn't harass them. And that is really symptomatic of the kind of relationship that villagers in that area had with the police. Because the only thing that the police meant to them was harassment. Nobody really took cases to the court or to the police. And most cases were settled within the village. Now, if you look at Adivasi law, mostly, it is, in general, the aim is restoration of peace, right? It's restoration of relationships between the wronged parties, between their families. And while there is a lot of kind of condemnation of khap panchayats, of non-state law, I really don't see that state law has that much more to recommend it. And in fact, there are many, many places where non-state law is actually much more efficacious in delivering justice. I remember some years ago, and I think this was the CHRI project with Doyle looking, and the idea was to look at, to invite proposals for people to look at different forms of justice. And somebody from MP from Hidayatullah University had proposed looking at the practices of the Chambal Valley dacoits and the Naxalites. And the person from the ministry who was, I think, somehow involved with the project said, how can we look at these systems, because to study the Naxalites or to study the dacoits is to legitimize the law. Now, I think if you don't try and even understand why people are going to the dacoits in the Chambal Valley, or why the Naxalites are popular precisely because of their justice delivery mechanisms, you're not really going to be able to address the issue. So you need to look at why people, so for instance, coming to the Maoists in Bastar, one of the reasons why people began to support them, began to go to them, was precisely because they delivered justice free. Unlike the traditional justice delivery system where the elders would, of course, they would mediate, they would, bring parties together and and people in those village panchayats were telling their stories. And again, there too, whoever was most effective in telling their story would win. But one of the reasons was that they stopped, the village elders would ask for money and have a feast. So this could actually run into thousands, 20,000, 30,000, which really impoverished families. So on the one hand, they knew that the Naxalites were brutal with their punishment, so that if you violated their decisions, then you would be severely punished. But they also felt that here was a chance where they could get hearing, and the only final outcome was that both sides had to shake hands. Now, just let me give you another example of the kind of village disputes that come up and which are settled locally. So there was this one case a few years ago where somebody had killed a person in the village. It was some lumpen youth who had been hired by somebody in the village to do this killing. So nobody was able to kind of say who it was or do anything. So the Naxalites called the headman and the priest of the village and said that if you don't find who the culprits are, you will not be allowed to cultivate. Now, if the priest cannot cultivate, nobody in the village can cultivate. So basically that meant that unless the culprit was found, the cultivation, and this was sometime in before the sowing season, this was going to actually destroy the whole local village cultivation. So soon enough, within 1 or 2 months, people found who the culprit was, they were punished, and that was the end of it, right? So compared to that, legal systems which drag on and on and on, and unlike what Javed Akhtar said this morning, where there is a closure, there is a happy ending, my experience with the legal system is that there is never an ending. And really, if you have to compare what is happening in many parts of the country with conflict, it's really the stories that we should be telling ourselves are the stories of the Mahabharata. Because in a war that goes on for so long, there are no victors, there are no losers, there is nobody who is absolutely innocent, absolutely correct, and there is nobody who is absolutely evil. If anything the Mahabharata teaches us, it's not about a just war, it's about the futility of war. And enfolded in that overarching narrative of the Pandavas and the Kauravas and the big, big leaders who won, are all the small, small stories of Yudhishthira telling the lie about Ashwathama, of somebody else, of Draupadi's question when she asked, how can you, now that you are a slave, that the legal question that she asked, how can you who are now a slave give me away in a game, right? So there are millions and millions of stories in the Mahabharata, the little stories. And when you think about a conflict such as in Bastar or in Kashmir or in Manipur, it's all those little stories which somehow don't get heard in court. And one of the things that I've learned as a sociologist is not the fact of legal pluralism, because it does exist. As I just said, there are non-state ways of settling disputes. But the fact that this situation where state law is the overarching law means that a lot of people have to do a lot of work in terms of translation. So my task is to bring those stories from Bastar and to translate them to our lawyers who have been brilliant. The task of the lawyers is to tell that story to the court. And those two stories are quite different stories. I would, for me, what matters is all the little reasons why people are in the situation they are in, the kind of compromises they make, the fact that everybody is in some sense a double agent. They want to support the Naxalites, they want the state, they want to vote, they don't want to do something. So nobody is on one side or the other side. Everybody is on every side, in a sense, right? So I'll just end with a couple of small stories which, in a sense, bring out what are we fighting for, and perhaps, the fact that we need to be thinking beyond justice in this existing legal system or justice in a non-state system, but we need to be thinking about something like mediation. I wish the courts would order mediation for these conflicts, or a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because really there is no other way but to allow people to tell their stories. Because what we wanted was a Justice Sri Krishna to listen to our stories. What we got was a police team which took a woman's sari after 2 years. She had only 2 saris. This was a rape that was committed in 2011. She had washed her sari many times. They take it away after 1 year, and then CBI says, rape could not be substantiated by forensic evidence. Now, how will it ever be substantiated by forensic evidence? What is the point of even bringing in forensic evidence into a case like this? What is the point of translating any of this into legal language when what people want in their lives is so different? And just to end with one of the things that happened between 2005 and 2007 was that many people were forced to leave their villages were burnt, they were forced to go and live in camps. Now, anybody who was not in the village was considered a Naxalite, because if you were, anybody who was in the village was considered a Naxalite, because if you were not an Naxalite, you would not be staying on in your village, you would be with a camp. Now, one of the reasons why we talked to this village where a person was killed, and we asked why didn't he go to camp when the rest of the village had gone. So they said his sulfi tree, this toddy palm tree, had just begun to give sap, and he could not leave his sulfi tree at such a time. He had to stay in the village and drink. So I can understand, because my happiest moments have come drinking sulfi with friends. But how to tell somebody, how to tell the police, and how to tell the judges that the sulfi tree was the cause of this man's death, right? Or the refusal of the police to understand the importance of this sulfi tree. There was another case in September this year. I went to this village where I was staying with this man whose daughter had been killed in May, and he was very, when you listen to these stories, you have to be calm because they are calm. People don't cry when they tell you these stories. But you can tell by the way that he showed me her photograph and the way that he was smoothing the photograph which had been pulled out of his house in an attack. And he said she was killed because the mahua was flowering, and the field where the mahua was flowering was near a river where the buffaloes come to drink. And because she wanted to make sure that her mahua was safe from the buffaloes, she was spending the night out in the fields to protect her mahua tree. And because she was spending the night out in the tree, why would anybody, in the fields, why would anybody spend the night out in the fields? They must be a Naxalite, and she was killed. So where do we begin to take all these stories and translate them into something that is legal? I don't think it's possible. I don't think we can expect justice for all these different lives. What we can hope for is I don't know what we can hope for anymore, but I'm confident that all of you who are bringing such diverse experiences, people like Shamnad, people like Dr. Sharma, all the lawyers who care, can somehow think of how to translate this into ideas of justice, into the courts, so that even if all these stories don't get heard, overall the final story will be of some peace. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm going to tell you 2 stories because I know somebody's eyeing at me. So both the stories are very close to me, to my heart. First story is about Mr. Singh. Mr. Singh hails from a place in Pakistan called Sialkot. He was born in Amritsar, but he spent most of his childhood in Amritsar and Sialkot. His mother dies when he is 5 years old. And so he has to come to Amritsar, stay there. He has a stepmother now who is actually like Cinderella's mom. So he, along with his younger brother and sister, elder sister, have to shunt between Amritsar, Sialkot, back, have a very, very painful childhood. Couldn't be sent to school for a very long time. When he grows young, he knows that he has to look for a living. So he comes to Kanpur, gets a job there. Then he moves to Pratapgarh. Then he reaches Delhi. And when he reaches Delhi, he bumps into one of his ancestral uncle who happens to be a thorough gentleman. And this gentleman really wants to help Mr. Singh. And so Mr. Singh gets to work on a daily wages as a clerk in one of the ministries in the city of New Delhi. And then he builds rapport and he gets on to work as a dispatch guy. Then he gets an opportunity where he has to fill, in summers, extreme summers. I don't know how many of you witnessed them. But Delhi extreme summers were bad. And so he gets another opportunity to continue working in the government office to fill water in the coolers. And gradually then one day luck would have it, he gets to work as a staff car driver. Now he's very happy because he gets to drive a car and he's moving around. And he's moving around with the elite people of the ministry. He works as a driver with the ministers, with the top secretaries. Now this Mr. Singh used to hail from a very well-to-do family in Amritsar. The family literally owned half the city. But as luck would have it, the elders in the family were either gamblers or fond of drinking, and so out of the half the city now they just have 2 houses. And one house where he still has his childhood memories. When he grows up, he gets married, he has a child, and he keeps narrating those stories and keeps reliving his childhood, his youth, and keeps remembering all the good things that people did to him. And then one day, his stepmother dies, and he gets a letter. His father is gone, his stepmother is gone. Now he has his 3 siblings from this mother and 4 siblings from the stepmother. And he gets a summons which says that the 2 houses that were the ancestral property need to be disputed. They are disputed cases. So he fights a case in the court for 27 years. And then one day, he is completely saddened because the house where he wants to be, where he wants to go and spend some time after his retirement, is no longer a place where he can even enter. Because in the judgment, it was said, it wrote, I have not taken my share of property. But because Mr. Singh's advocate did not value ethics or his profession, he valued money more. With the clerk, they play a instance with him, and they say, they erase the word not, and it's written, I have taken my share of property. He's a simple man. By the time he gets the judgment copy, by the time he approaches the court again, the time has already fallen off. His child, when she comes to know about it, wants to help the father. And so she says, okay, let me take you to the court and understand what's happened. But it's too late, as Geeta ma'am said. The time had run out. And furthermore to this, she meets another lawyer in the city of Chandigarh. And there, this lawyer shows some hope at a price of 1 lakh. For her father's happiness and with a little bit of hope that she sees in the lawyer, she is ready to pay that amount. And on the day of the justice, on the day of the hearing, she gets a call in the evening that the judge simply picked up the file and kept it aside. I just want to understand Mr. Singh's right to get into his own house. He obviously could not go to the court every time staying in Delhi. So sometimes when he used to make an effort to go to Amritsar, he used to simply get an answer from his advocate saying, the date has been adjourned. At the hands of, he was completely trusting law. He was completely trusting his advocate, the judiciary, the system. But what did he get in the end? I'm sure there would be very, very many cases like this in the courthouses. But to me, this case is affected because Mr. Singh is my father, and Mr. Singh is no more. I tried to get him justice, but I realized when I spoke to people that it's such a fruitless effort. But it's been just 1 month that he's passed away, and I have promised him that I will try and see if I can do something. They cannot take my father's right to go back into his house. I am very angry with that advocate, but when I look at the whole lot of you, I see a ray of hope. That you are not going to be like the lawyer who used to be. And do you know what is the tragedy? My father worked with the law minister. And he would often tell me, so and so can help us, let's go and talk to them. And I would take an appointment and they would say, come and meet us in the chamber. A person who has worked as a staff car driver, has an access into the minister's house, knows the boy with whom he's asking me to get an appointment, tells me after listening, even after listening to his name, he tells me to come and see him in the chambers. I said, Dad, not worth it. Is this the kind of system that we are hoping for justice? I have often heard people say, कानून अंधा होता है. होता है. आप तो अंधे नहीं हैं. When I got this opportunity to address you people, I was first, नहीं जाना. कुछ नहीं करना. Judiciary, law, इन लोग के साथ कुछ काम नहीं करना. But then, while I was talking to him, very spontaneously all this came out and he said, there is an opportunity to address these youngsters who are going to be the future advocates, to hold on to your ethics, to hold on to your value systems. You may not earn money, that is not important. Money will anyways come to you. When all this was happening and I was interacting with a lot of people, my sister-in-law's father was an advocate. He said, Simi, बहुत शर्म की बात है. एक ज़माना वो भी था जब लोग बस्ते में पैसा लेके घूमते थे कि कोई बेईमान एडवोकेट मिल जाए. आज वो ज़माना है लोग बस्ते में पैसा लेके घूमते हैं, कोई ईमानदार एडवोकेट मिल जाए. आई डोंट नो वो कितना सच कह रहे थे, कितना झूठ कह रहे थे, बट मेरे केस में मुझे ये सच लगा. Despite paying the lawyer the fees, despite trusting him, this is what I got. I have not taken my share of property. So, yes, as so very rightly said, no story comes to an end. There was a pause. Now that pause is going to be erased, and probably I will start up with this story once again to see what best can be done to make my father's soul rest in peace. And thank you so much for listening patiently. One more story I would like to tell you. I'm a typical storyteller. I cannot sit for a long time. So I'm going to stand up and tell you a story. And I'm sure since morning, there has been a lot of opportunities for you to listen to people, take a lot of inputs. Some you may be very convinced about, some you may not be convinced about. But I would just like to tell you one story. And the story is, there was this zamindar. You know who's a zamindar, right? So he had 100 villages under him. How many villages? Are you sleeping? How many villages? 100 villages under him. And all those 100 villages were... People were... Why are we so negative? They were happy. They were prosperous. Not only were the people happy, the crops were happy. Now you would ask me, how would the crops be happy? Can somebody tell me? If the crops were not happy, they would go like this way. But if they were happy, they would go like this, and that's how the crops would wave to him. And the animals were happy. How were the animals happy? Yeah, they would probably wag their tail. The quality of the milk that the cows used to give was brilliant. So in all those 100 villages, there was prosperity, there was happiness. Then one day, this zamindar was sitting, and he was thinking about something, and then he calls his son. He had 5 daughters and 1 son. So he calls his son and he says, "Come here." And the boy comes running and says, "Yes, Daddy." He says, "Listen, I want you to go." He was in grade 5. He says, "I want you to go to another city and study there." He says, "Fine, Daddy." He says, "No, it's not all that fine. Because that would mean that we have to be separated. You cannot move to and fro because the city where I want to send you is about 1,200 kilometers away from here." He says, "But why do you want me to do that?" He says, "Because I want you to get the best of education so that when you become the zamindar, you can take care of people even better than what I can do. I know it's sad. I love you the way you love me. But for a future, for a better future, you will have to go." The boy is very upset, but he loves his father and he understands what the father is saying. So the next day, he leaves. Grade 5 gone, grade 6 gone, grade 7 gone, grade 8 gone. Every time he used to feel sad, he used to think about his father. "When you come back, I want you to be complete, to take over the reins from me." And again, he would get back to his studies. He was not only good in studies, he was good at all the extracurricular activities. One year he would go for swimming, the next year he went for taekwondo, and he had all the certificates. He had certificates, he had medals, he earned laurels, shields, everything, and he had a big trunk. You know what's a trunk? Yeah? It was all filled with all this. Now, when the boy was in grade 10, he not only got the best or the highest marks in grade 10 in the school, but he also topped the whole state. The father was very proud of him. He thinks, now I'll be able to go back. The father says, "No, hold on, stay there. I want you to do such and such meditation course and then come back." The boy says, "Meditation course? What am I going to do? I'm not becoming a saint." But then he has to listen to his father because he completely trusts his father. So he goes to do various courses. Grade 12, he not only tops the state, he tops the entire board. He's very happy that now my father will finally call me. The father says, "Hey, I am sending you to this university. It is further 500 kilometers away. Best of professors. I want you to learn from them." The boy says, "Fine." He goes there. Now he is a scholar and he has got the highest, he earns a gold medal, he earns the highest marks time for him to come back. When he comes back, it's like Lord Rama returning to Ayodhya. Everybody's happy. And it's a feast time. And all those 100 villages, folk is invited for the feast. So when he comes back, great festivities are happening. Next day morning, the father says, "So son, how was it?" He says, "Dad, I want you to come and see something in my room." So the father goes to the son's room and he opens that trunk and he shows him all the certificates and everything and everything and everything. Now, the father feels very proud, and somehow after interactions with the son, he realizes now it's the time for me to hand over the reins to my son. So he calls the Panditji, and the auspicious date where the reins are going to be handed over to the son are taken out, and the Mahurat is exactly after 21 days. So the son and the father, they decide, okay, father says, tomorrow morning onwards, you sit with me. Early morning, 5 o'clock, when I have my bed tea, I want you to sit with me. For 1.5 hours, I'm going to tell you of stories and you tell me of your stories, and we will have a great time together. So again, it begins like that. And a week passes by, and then on the 10th day, the father tells the son, "Do you see that hillock over there?" The boy says, "Yes, I do." The father says, "I want you to go there." He said, "And do what?" He said, "There's a saint who lives in a small cottage. I want you to go and learn from him." The boy says, "My father's lost it. He sent me to the best of schools, to the best of universities, and now he wants me to go and be with that saint for 7 days? What is he going to teach me? That illiterate fellow. I will possibly teach him 10 things." But because he respects his father so much, he neither can question nor say no. So he says, "Okay, when do I have to go?" Father says, "Tomorrow." How many days? 5 days. The boy is very upset. Next day morning, he leaves for that hillock, that cottage out there. And early morning, 5 o'clock, he's walking. And he's walking and he's walking and he's walking and he's walking and he's not walking like a normal person. He's walking very angrily. And how do you walk when you walk angrily? Use your feet and tell me. Only 1 or 2 people? The rest of us don't get angry? Or we don't walk when we are angry? What do we do? "I don't want to do this. I hate it." And he's walking and he's cursing his father and he's cursing the moment when he has to listen to that. And he said yes, and still he's walking. But he's not realizing in his anger that he's walking through the most beautiful part of the town. It's a combination of a garden and an orchard. So there are fruits hanging from the trees and there are flowers. And it's early morning, 5 o'clock, birds are chirping. There is music in the air, freshness in the air, and he's walking with those heavy steps. And suddenly there is this butterfly which is hovering over him. He says, "Go away!" But the butterfly continues to chase him, follow him. He says, "Listen, I'm telling you, you go away from here. Will you listen to me?" How will a butterfly listen to him? So he catches hold of the butterfly in his palms. And now he's walking and he looks at the butterfly, and that frown suddenly changes into a smile. And now instead of those heavy steps, he's walking very fast, but very happy steps. And he has the butterfly in his palms, and he's thinking about something, and he's walking, and he reaches the cottage, and because he has the palms all closed with the butterfly in it, he knocks at the door using his foot. And you know how beautiful it sounds. And the saint comes out and he says, "Yes, what can I do for you?" He says, "I am so and so." "Oh yes, your father's men came and told me that you're going to be staying with me for 5 days, though I've tried to make my cottage as comfortable as I can for you, but I hope you're going to enjoy staying over here." The boy says, "Listen, hold on, oldie. Don't be so happy. I have a question for you. If you're able to give me an answer, I shall gladly accept you as my guru. Else, I don't think you have anything to tell me, Christian." He says, "Look, I have a butterfly in my palms. Tell me, is it alive or dead? The saint looks at the boy and he smiles. The boy says, I know, it's a tricky question, but I need an answer. Okay, let's have it from you. I have a butterfly in my palms. Is it alive or dead? How many of you would say it is alive? Raise your hands. How many of you would say it is dead? Raise your hands. The ones who are not raising their hands, can I have an answer? I don't see good signs there. Well, the saint might have not gone to a university, might have not been to a school, but he had lived a bigger institute called life. So the saint looks at the boy and he says, son, it is all in your hands. Because the boy thought, if the saint is going to say that the butterfly is dead, I'm going to release it. If the saint says it is alive, I will crush it. In both the cases, who's the winner? Who's the winner? The boy. But as I told you, I may not be a lawyer. I may not use those terminologies that I've been listening to. I was getting jitters when I was sitting over here. Oh my God, ऐसे शब्द तो मैंने ज़िंदगी में कभी नहीं सुने. But we all have something to learn from each other. So this entire, I think, 2-day conference is all in your hands. You want to take it as a good time. You listen to people's stories. You listen to people talking to you. Great. Or you want to be somebody to make sure that there is no second Simi. I know it's a long battle, but I'm ready to fight it. And I will do that. Thank you so much. Good. Did you like the story? What did you like? How many of you could visualize the story? Great. Fantastic. So you told me what are the elements of a good storytelling. You have it. Next time when you want to tell a story, it should be something that the other person can see it with their eyes open. Yeah? So this is the guru mantra of a good storytelling. Thank you so much. Another thing that I would like to tell you over here is we spoke about us being good storytellers. But as a therapist, I got an opportunity to work with Tihar Jail, and that was the time when I realized that just narrating, me as a storytelling, narrating stories to people will probably work good, but the best is when you ask the other person to tell the story. Because when a client comes to you, the client will probably come prepared with all those notes that he or she has felt is important. But the finer details, which probably can change the course of your case, are the finer ones that are generally left out. So make the person feel comfortable and say, tell me your story. And as the person is telling the stories, keep jotting down whatever you feel is relevant. So storytelling works both ways. Thank you.
Brilliant. I think we couldn't have asked for a better panel. And thank you, Simi, because I did tell her that when we spoke and she wanted to run away from lawyers and the conference because of the bad experience, I said, this is the opportunity. Please come and present this because here are the set of people that will change the way we think about lawyers. And that's our hope as well, that when you go out there, you give people like her a chance to see the legal profession in a completely different light and the legal ecosystem in a different light, because there's magic that we can really do. It's a powerful profession, and I think as Uncle Ben says in Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility, and it is our responsibility to make sure that people who rely on us as advocates, as torchbearers of justice, that we perform in a way that is exemplary and that lives up to all these values. And thank you, Simi, also because I told her that we want to make good storytellers out of our students. So that was what I saw on YouTube, a little bit of that as well, and we'll have her for a longer session later. But of course, get the judge to visualize, but some parts like stomping in court you need to cut out, because otherwise I think there will be, judges, sometimes it's like, when we filed, as you know, IDIA, now we do a lot of public interest work. We have a separate wing called PPIL, Promoting Public Interest Law, and when we filed a petition on Aadhaar, we were very insistent. Our lawyer is here, in fact, Rupali, thank you. Pro bono, another good, very good, exceptionally good pro bono lawyer. We were discussing we were just discussing that pro bono lawyers always leave pro bono work right towards the end, after all the regular client matters, but the very few who actually take the commitment seriously. But at that time, we said we must infuse a little more, what should I say, writ petitions and others are drafted quite boringly. Let's infuse a little more life into these. So we started with a small poem, and I think the first two lawyers that we approached said, no, you can't put poems in petitions. The judges will view it very negatively. And we said, okay, then we'll go with a lawyer who's a little more open-minded. And thankfully, they took our case. And we retain the poem inside of that, because we said that's an important way to present our case in a more immediate, in a way that, because poetry almost everyone gets, they understand it, they feel it. You don't need to say in 1,000 words. I think as the Japanese would do it in 3-4 lines in a haiku style format, you get the entire thrust of what the issue is about. I think the message from the panel, brilliant, across the board. I think several of them alluded, starting with Professor Sharma, that there is no end to the story, and Nandini as well said, what is the final resolution? Do we really see as a beginning, a start, an end? I think it's always going to be cyclical. It's going to be a dynamic process. It's what Justice Chandrachud said. It's going to be a continuous dialogue. Or Javed Saab, and since Javed Saab was here, if I were to borrow from Bollywood, I'll say, story abhi bhi baki hai mere dost, changing it slightly, but I think the story will continue. And one part of the story, I think, we will carry on to our next session, which is on ethics, which we're quite serious about. I think hopefully same time next year, we'll all reassemble for the rest of the story and see how we can take it forward, and at least in the interim, give space for many more stories to come forward. As Nandini says, there must be a way in which we can get people whose stories are marginalized to come more on the mainstream, because I think that's what we need most. We notice it personally with IDIA a lot with communities in the Northeast, that there's tremendous prejudice and bigotry simply because we don't hear their stories. She sees it in the context of Bastar and the areas that she's been working in. I think Carl sees stories from the perspective of the government and the others who don't really understand the concerns, and a technocracy that thinks that they're one level higher and don't see the concerns. And we have to find ways in which to redress that. And storytelling should not just be about, again, on a good ending note, should not be about just telling stories, but also hearing stories and hearing the others' stories. It reminds me of a little thing that went viral on Twitter and some of the social media. You've all heard TED Talks, right? Many of you must have heard TED Talks, and there was a nice snippet, a cartoon going around saying, yes, TED talks, but does he ever listen? And I think we need to cultivate the habit of listening as well, and who better to tell us a little bit about it? I know he has a remark to make, but I'll ask him also to express a few views on this. How to be a great listener, and along with being a great storyteller, and with that, one of the finest legal minds that I've encountered, Mr. Luthra.
Thank you. I'll finish with your point.
Yeah, can we get in the mic?
Thank you. On your listening point, I see youngsters nowadays, and it's not about running them down. I'm very fond of the millennials and the Y generation, personally. But a lot of tendency now is happening, they only listen to reply. They don't listen to listen. And my logic in telling all of you is that not to preach you, but to tell you, please listen to listen, because when you reply without listening, you can only reply what you know. There is a possibility if you listen, you might know two more things, and your reply may be that much better. Since you talked about ethics, Simi, has Mr. not been complained against at the Bar Council? Why? So what? You must make a complaint to the Bar Council, and Mr. Not
Wait.
must be pulled up.
Wait.
That's the ethics part of it.
And we can help you with that.
And I'm sorry to put it this way. I know you've been through a rough time, but then we are at fault. We're letting Not get away. I'm sorry I'm calling him Not, but it's appropriate.
Yeah. And as I think as Maja rightly said, you know, half these, you can't change by using her words, exhortation. We have to change by example. And so we push the bounds, we change constantly, and we need to make an example out of it. So more than, we have a great team of fine people that are taking on these causes, so we will do it on your behalf, and I think Mr. Luthra is absolutely right. So with that, I throw it open for some, to the floor for questions. Please address your questions to specific panelists and introduce yourself, and then we can take it forward. Thank you. Any questions? Please introduce yourself and address it to the specific panel.
Storytelling, or I mean, how do we accommodate the reaction of audience? And more so, we are talking in the courtroom, we say that understand the reception of the bench, whether they are hearing you or listening to you, and do you really change your line of direction or say arguments in the legal manner when you see them behaving differently or receiving your thoughts differently. So the question is, the reception of the audience, the behaving pattern of the audience, the response which they give as the audience were giving to your story, does the line change because of the audience, or we move or accommodate constantly? I mean, that's the question to you.
When I was telling you this story, most of us were visualizing it, right? Though this is the first time that I'm encountering a whole lot of advocates, and this kind of a question has been put up to me. What I have seen is, when I work with, I'm promoting stories as a educational tool, as a parenting tool, and as a therapy. So I have not used stories from the legal perspective. This is the first time, but maybe we can try this out. But what is magical about a story is, when you are convinced about a story and you tell a story, people will dwell upon it the way you want it to be. Like I was telling you this story. You all know that this story probably never happened, the story of a zamindar, but still you all believed in it, right? So how good a storyteller you are, keeping your facts in place, if you are able to portray that in the way that you feel that it has actually happened, and you are putting it across as somebody who sees it and is narrating the entire thing, I think it will, the best part about the storytelling is that people are receptive and they begin to analyze as though, they begin to experience it. So that is an art, and that art you will have to practice.
My name is Rajuram. So my question is, how do we draw the balance between justice and good storytelling? Like it may happen sometime that, there is good story, but we know the truth, right? But we rely on the evidence. So how do we draw the balance between justice and good story?
That is the task of a good storyteller.
On these issues.
No, I don't know that there's that much wisdom that one can give you. Courtroom advocacy
Um, courtroom advocacy is not an art, it's a craft. You have to learn it. And you have to, I don't know how much you want to keep ethics as your ethical behavior as the central point in what you're doing. But if you start from that central point, you actually get to Elon Musk's trunk, what you spoke about in the morning. And then on top of that, you've got, if you're in the Supreme Court, you... Yeah, I get it. But you were the one who adverted to it. Yeah. Sorry, what were we talking about? Yeah. If you're in the Supreme Court and you're doing an SLP matter and you're doing an admission matter, you've got less than 3 minutes, 4 minutes. So you haven't got time to be faffing about. You can't tell a story. You're going to say, I have these 3 points to make. That the man then says, okay, you've given me something that I can hold on to and justify my taking your case. In the lower courts, depending on where you are, whether you are at the charge sheet, nobody tells, for instance, I'll tell you, where lawyers really, really fail, is nobody makes the effort right at first appearance to question in criminal law why this man has been arrested at all. They don't challenge the judge. Then they fall into this pattern of, ठीक है जज साहब ऐसे बोलेंगे कि उसके बाद मैं जाऊंगा और फिर वो आदमी है वो application देगा फिर मैं bail के लिए जाऊंगा. On the third hearing you will get bail. Why? Look at your criminal procedure code. It doesn't say that you wait till the third application. लेकिन आदत पड़ गई है. It's when you're making your arguments in defense, you're casting doubt on the prosecution's case. All you have to do is to cast sufficient doubt, and he has to prove his case. If you're a prosecution lawyer, you have much more of a story to tell. Then you have at sentencing. At sentencing, you have a story to tell that will be ameliorative. Then you're pulling at the heartstrings. You're tugging at the heartstrings of the judge. You're explaining why something happened. You're reducing the sentence. So at each stage, when you're talking to a witness, that's a completely different story. You're manipulating a story, not perhaps badly manipulating it, but you're casting doubt or you're drawing forth things. So it depends. When you're making your closing argument, that's when you have to be really dramatic. But not so dramatic, because here you don't have a jury. You have a judge who hasn't got the time to listen. So it depends. The gentleman who asked the question there, yes, everything has to do with your audience. Everything has to do with the moment. Everything has to do with the time available and your preparedness. My argument with lawyers is that they don't prepare. They don't know let alone the facts to gayi. Lekin if you know the law, you can know how to use it at least.
Okay, one last question and then we'll wind up. Yes, Afsar, last question.
Respected dignitaries, I am Afsar Raza from National Law University, Ranchi, pursuing third year. So we have been listening about ethics, right? So what I believe that ethics is something subjective. My question is that, suppose there is a lawyer and a client come to him and says that he has committed a murder or a theft, like non-billable offense, and he pays him for the same. So should the lawyer save him or not? If not, where should be the line of demarcation? My question is to Professor Moolchand, sir.
What we can do is reflect on, I think it's purely on legal ethics. We'll take that at the next conference, Afsar, and we can have it on the sidelines as a debate. But that's straight 101 legal ethics, and we'll do it straight as a legal ethics question. It's a difficult question to resolve. But from the perspective of storytelling, maybe we're looking at it through this lens. So on legal ethics, we'll take it separately next year, and we'll thrash all these out if that's okay. Yeah. Okay. So with that, can I please request all of you to give a big round of applause to this. wonderful panel, and we have again a token of appreciation. May I request the pots and the other things to be handed out by our IDIA scholars, and we can start taking from Nandini. And then. Big thank you again to Professor Nandini Sundar. A heartfelt thanks to Maja Daruwala. To Simi Srivastava. Malamud. And we save the best for last, Professor Moolchand Sharma. Okay, now it's just a... Now just a very quick 1-minute vote of thanks, if I can request the panelists to be seated either here or down wherever you're comfortable. Just a 1-minute vote of thanks, and then we won. So I begin by thanking Professor Dr. Manoj Sinha, the director of ILI, and his wonderful team at ILI for hosting us here today, for giving us repeated access to this facility year after year, and for really going out of the way to help and support us. And some of our scholars are staying here as well. So thank you very much to the ILI for this wonderful show of support. To Abhimanyu Bandari, our chief patron, who's been supporting the IDIA conference year after year. He's not here with us right now, but he was here in the morning. And his office, Ruhina and the others. To our dignitaries yesterday who graced us. To all of the wonderful panelists and speakers who took time out from their schedules to be with us. To some of them spent the entire day with us, and we're truly grateful for that. Carl spent 2 days, yesterday evening and today, so thank you, Carl. And thanks to all the others. Thank you to our scholars and our teams and the audience that have attended this. But most importantly, thanks to a wonderful IDIA team that made this whole show possible. They worked really hard, and I want to again welcome them back here. Svetlana and team, Svetlana, Sharmeen, Arnab, Harshit, Swati, please. And the NLU Delhi team. Is Ashdeep and the NLU Delhi team here? They have an exam. Despite an exam, they really helped out. So we thank them in their absence. But these are all our IDIA directors who helped put the show together. All of them worked very hard, so a big, big round of applause. And we also have to thank Aditi Kamath, who's our Executive Vice President sitting out of Brussels. She did a lot of stuff on the email and wherever she could help, but really coordinated the entire show. So big thanks to Aditi, wherever she is, if she's watching this. And she in fact made possible the Facebook live feed as well, because her husband works in Facebook. And so we were able to get that quickly without problems. So thank you, Aditi, and thank you to all of you for really making this such a wonderful show. Thank you very much. And thanks for being so patient and being with us today. So I think with that, we end the session. We come back next year for a more invigorating session to create better lawyers, more ethical lawyers, to have people like Simi come back to us and say, yes, now lawyers have risen in my esteem, and it's a good profession. That's what we want, and that's why we'll get. So thank you.